Political instability in Spain. After the death of Ferdinand VII, Spain went through a downward spiral as a world power. By 1830, all of Spain's American colonies have succeeded and became independent states, with the exception of Cuba and Puerto Rico. A struggle for the throne followed between the forces loyal to Ferdinand's daughter Isabella and his brother Charles. The ensuing struggle would be known as the Carlist Wars. The forces loyal to Isabella defeated the Carlists, allowing her to defy tradition to become the sole female monarch of Spain. Under Isabella II, Spain lost the bid to reconquer Peru and Chile, and under continued mismanagement by her favorites. The empire was a shadow of its former glory. There were frequent changes of government in Spain which prevailed even after Isabella's overthrow in 1868. The 19th century was a turbulent century of politics in Spanish history. It is a period of political instability owing to the frequent rise and fall of ministries and constitutions. To save the country from political disunity, the Spanish crown worked out the Canovite system or rotativism. Under this policy, the liberals and conservatives in Spain took turns in administering the affairs of the country. Abandonment of mercantilism. Along with political change, there was also a shift in the world economy. Before the 19th century, Europeans practiced mercantilism, which is an economic doctrine based on the idea that the country's wealth and power can be measured in stocks of gold and silver. It also means that all trade should be conducted within a certain country and its colonies. Trade was dictated by the monarch and wealth should flow toward the center of imperial power. This resulted into the creation of monopolistic ventures like the galleon trade between Manila and Acapulco, which began in 1565. The Philippines was prohibited from trading with other European countries. Spain's adaptation of the laissez-faire policy affected the Philippines in several ways. The result of greater participation in trade created a new middle class in the colony. With the newfound wealth, middle-class families were able to send their children to acquire higher education, which gave them perspectives on Spain's treatment of the Philippines. Increased contact with the West brought home political ideas prevailing in Europe. These ideas were mainly Enlightenment ideas, which preached equality and God-given rights of men. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 and the laying of a telegraph line, which connected the Philippines to the rest of the world, brought Europe closer to the Philippines, and the Enlightenment ideas became more prevalent among the members of the middle class. These people became known as the Ilustrados or the Enlightened Ones. Imbued with civic courage, they began questioning the abuses of the Spanish regime and began to clamor for reforms. This class brought for reformists, which included Rizal. As a result of the Spanish conquest of the Philippines, the Filipinos lost their ancestral lands on account of Spain's institution of the encomienda system. They were forced by the Spanish colonizers to accept Spanish culture and religion. This change was evident in the administrative organization of the country, social structure and educational system of the Philippines, and economic situation in the 19th century. The Philippines was governed directly by the Spanish crown through the Ministry of Colonies in the 19th century. The government of the country was unitary as policies implemented by colonial administrators from Luzon to Mindanao emanated from the Manila, the seat of the central government. The Governor-General appointed by the Spanish monarch was the head of the Spanish colonial government in the country. As such, he represented the crown in all governmental matters. He was the viceroyal patron over religious affairs. As the viceroyal patron, he could nominate priests for ecclesiastical administration of the parishes. He was also the commander-in-chief of the colonial army. As the chief executive of the colonial government, He was an ex-officio president of the Royal Audiencia, the Supreme Court in the Philippines during those times. Considering that there was no lawmaking body in the country then, the Governor-General had legislative powers. At his discretion, he can legislate laws for the colony. Laws enacted by the Governor-General were called actos acordados. Since Spain was very far from the Philippines, the Governor-General had the power of complaint or the power to decide which law or royal decree should be implemented or disregarded in the colony. Below the national government were the local government units, namely provinces, towns, cities, and barrios. The provinces during the Spanish regime were called alcaldías. Each province was headed by an alcalde mayor or provincial governor who exercised executive and judicial functions. The provincial government was the most corrupt unit in local government then, owing to the privilege to engage in and monopolize trade called indulto de comercio. The alcaldías or provinces were divided into towns or pueblos. Each pueblo was headed by a gobernadorcillo or town mayor. At first, he was elected by all married males. In the 19th century, he was voted by 13 electors, chaired by the outgoing gobernadorcillo. As the town executive, his principal responsibility was tax collection. To ensure collection and remittance of these taxes, he was required to mortgage his property to the government at the beginning of his term of office. Each town was divided into barrios or barangays. As the smallest unit of governance, each barangay was headed by a cabeza de barangay. His main function was the maintenance of peace and order and the collection of taxes and tributes in the barangay. The city government during the Spanish regime was called ayuntamiento. It was governed by a cabildo or city council composed of a city mayor, alcalde and ordinario, councilors, regidores, chief constable, alguacil mayor, and a secretary, escribano. Key figure in the local administrative setup was the Spanish friar. This was because of the union of the church and state in the Philippines, a principle upon which the Spanish colonial government in the country was founded. The friar was the supervising representative of the Spanish government for all local affairs. Thus, his approval was necessary on almost all acts of the local officials. He was practically the ruler of the town as he was the local school inspector, health inspector, prison inspector, and inspector of the accounts of the gobernadorcillos and cabeza de barangays. His approval was required in census lists, tax lists, list of army conscripts, and register of births, deaths, and marriages. Aside from friars who were considered as the governors of both body and soul, another institution feared in the Philippines then was the Guardia Civil. The Guardia Civil was organized in 1867 as a corps of native police under the leadership of Spanish officers for the purpose of dealing with outlaws and renegades. In 1880, it was the most feared instrument of the summary arrests of individuals identified by the friars as filibusteros or enemies of the government and herejes or enemies of the Catholic Church. Judicial power of the government was vested on the Audiencia Real, the Supreme Court during those times, and the lower courts. Below the Audiencia Real were two territorial audiencias, courts of first instance and the Justice of the Peace Courts. As the highest court in the Philippines, the Audiencia Real did not only adjudicate appeals for civil and criminal cases. It also served as a forum for settling important issues on governance and auditing agency of the finances of Spanish colonial administration in the country. On the whole, Spanish colonial administration was corrupt and inefficient. This can be attributed to several factors. Owing to the distance of the Philippines from Spain, the Governor-General exercised absolute powers. He could reward positions in the bureaucracy to his favorites who were unqualified and unfit for the government service. Although the Spanish crown had instituted the residencia, the trial of an outgoing Governor-General to account for his acts during his tenure of office, and the visitador an investigating officer to probe on the complaints against the Governor General. He was not able to resist corruption for his personal advantage. Another source of weakness and abuse of Spanish government was the widespread selling of lower positions to highest bidders. On account of the foregoing, many government officials in the country were appointed not on the basis of merit but ability to buy the position. This situation had given rise to misadministration of governmental affairs, bribery, as well as graft and corruption. Philippine society then was feudalistic as a consequence of the encomienda system imposed by the colonizers. The Filipinos were treated as slaves by the Spanish conquerors. They imposed and collected all forms of taxes and tributes from the Filipinos and even required the natives to render pola y servicio or forced labor to the government and the Catholic Church. At the apex of the social pyramid were the Peninsulares or the Spaniards born in Spain. Below them were the Insulares or Spaniards born in the Philippines, the Spanish and Chinese mestizos, and the Principalia or the ruling class of native elites composed of the gobernadorcillo, the beza de barangay, landowners, merchants, and the wealthy native families. At the bottom of the social pyramid, however, were the Angels or the brown-skinned natives who composed the majority of the people.